They said my voice could make stones weep. In Casablanca's narrow alleys, sound travels faster than truth. When I sang at weddings, the elders called me the Girl of Dawn. But when I sang in a nightclub in Paris, they called me the Lost One. I thought I was chasing music, but it was music chasing me. It pulled me out of prayer halls, across oceans, into mirrors that never showed the same woman twice. And when the microphones went silent, I found myself humming the verses I once swore to forget. My name is Salma Idrissi, and this is how my voice left God's house, and how silence brought it back. I was born in Essaouira, where the wind has a sound of its own, a soft hum that fills your chest before you ever learn to speak. My father, Idris, was a Quranic reciter at the local mosque. He said the voice was sacred only when used for devotion, and every morning I would imitate his chants, my little echoes trembling against the stone courtyard walls. When I was 9, he caught me singing verses from the radio, a song from a Cairo diva about love and cigarettes. He frowned, not out of anger, but sorrow. "Your voice," he said, "belongs to the sky, not to applause." I didn't understand then what he feared, only that the world outside our courtyard sounded freer, louder, and more alive. By 16, I was singing at weddings for extra money. It started with innocent folk songs, then pop, then melodies that flirted with the rhythm of foreign tongues. Each time, I saw something change in the audience, eyes glimmering not with faith, but desire. I told myself it was admiration, but deep down, I knew it was the first price of performance: misunderstanding. My father disapproved, of course. He would sit quietly at dinner, his prayer beads moving faster when I came home smelling of jasmine and amplifier heat. "Every gift," he said one night, "has its curse. If you sing for people, you will forget how to sing for God." That line haunted me, not because I believed it, but because part of me already knew it was true. At 20, I got an offer from a tourist agency in Marrakesh, performances for visiting foreigners at hotel bars. The pay was more than my father's monthly salary. When I told him, he looked at me as if I'd announced my own exile. He didn't forbid me. He only said, "If you go, take your verses with you. They'll remind you who you are when no one else does." That night, I packed a small bag, 2 scarves, 1 Quran, and a cassette of my father's recitations. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last time I would hear him call me Benti, my daughter, with tenderness. The first shows in Marrakesh were pure electricity. Tourists clapped without restraint, and I felt my name ripple through the air like silk. In that applause, I heard something I had never heard in prayer: recognition. It was intoxicating. Soon, the veils came off, literally. Stage costumes replaced modest dresses, eyeliner replaced kohl, and verses turned into lyrics written by others. My voice deepened with confidence, but thinned in spirit. I started to crave not the song, but the reaction after it. That brief, blinding moment when strangers believed I was someone they needed. Once, an agent from Paris approached me after a performance. He said, "Your tone is desert gold, warm, pure, and untrained. Come to France. We'll turn you into something the world can't ignore. I remember his perfume, tobacco and ambition. It clung to my jacket the whole night. When I returned to Essaouira for Eid, my father refused to open the door. He sent word through my younger brother, "Tell her, the voice that sings for applause no longer sings for prayer." That was the moment something split inside me. A quiet fracture. Not rebellion, not anger. Just a slow unraveling of belonging. I looked at the ocean that night and whispered, "If I can't sing for heaven, maybe I'll sing loud enough for the world to hear me." The next week, I boarded a flight to Paris, holding nothing but my passport, a new stage name, Salma Noor, and the wind of Essaouira trapped in my throat. Paris was not a city. It was a pulse, constant, electric, merciless. Every corner hummed with ambition. In the beginning, I thought I had arrived at the heart of music itself, where the cafes smelled of cigarettes and rebellion, and even silence seemed to hold rhythm. My first audition was in a cramped studio in Montmartre. The walls were lined with faded gold records, the air thick with ego and dust. They made me sing 3 songs, one Moroccan folk piece, one French ballad, one improvised. When I finished, the producer, a man with tired eyes and expensive shoes, said, "You have the desert in your throat. Let's make it shine with city light." That sentence became my mantra. I repeated it before every show, every recording, believing that I was transforming, evolving, becoming something more. But every metamorphosis has a hidden shedding. Mine began quietly. I stopped praying. At first, I told myself it was exhaustion. Long nights, late shows, tight schedules. But slowly, I realized it wasn't time I had lost. It was permission. How could I kneel after singing in places where people kissed strangers under red lights? How could I whisper verses after shouting lyrics I barely understood? I rented a small apartment in Belleville, a district of immigrants and dreamers. From my window, I could see both the mosque dome and the neon glow of the cabaret across the street. 2 worlds, so close they almost touched, and I was always in between them, a bridge that creaked with each new night. The clubs came quickly. First Le Mirage, then the Velvet Sun, then a residency at Club Lumière where international agents prowled for exotic acts. They liked to call me the Desert Siren. The nickname made me blush and ache at the same time, because sirens don't sing to be loved. They sing to be heard, and what they attract, they destroy. The first sign of temptation was not money, it was validation. People began to whisper my name in languages I didn't understand. A journalist wrote that my voice carried the ache of lost prophets. I clipped that line and framed it above my bed. For weeks, it was the first thing I saw each morning. A shrine built for pride. Soon came the photographers, the interviews, the endless questions about identity. They wanted the tragic immigrant story, the exotic struggle, the poetic pain. And I gave it to them, polished, performed, rehearsed. Every time they asked, "Do you miss Morocco?" I smiled and said, "Every day." But inside, I wondered if Morocco missed me at all. My producer, Lucien, became both mentor and mirror. He spoke softly, always smelling of cologne and deadlines. He taught me to control my tone, to let emotion break on the last syllable, to sing as if confessing a sin the microphone could absolve. One night during a recording session, he said, "Art needs hunger, Salma. You can't feed the soul and the audience at the same time." I laughed, but something in me believed him. So I stopped feeding the soul. The first album, Desert Light, launched within a year. It fused Arabic melodies with French lyrics, a collision of devotion and desire. The critics called it hauntingly divine. I called it survival. It sold thousands of copies. My face appeared on billboards across Paris, my eyes painted to look mysterious, foreign, untamed. I was becoming an image, and images don't pray. I told myself it was worth it. I sent money home, bought my father new prayer beads, though I never mailed them. I imagined his fingers counting prayers for a daughter who no longer counted them herself. Fame is not a flood, it's a slow drowning. You don't realize you're underwater until applause sounds like waves. The first European tour felt like a pilgrimage to everything I had once rejected. In London, I sang at a packed theater where the audience rose to its feet. When I bowed, I saw tears, not of devotion, but awe. And for a brief second, I felt divine. That was the sin I never confessed. I liked being worshipped. After shows, there were parties. Champagne, velvet couches, laughter that lasted till dawn. Men spoke my name like it was music itself. Selma, they'd say, letting the syllables melt. They didn't want me. They wanted what my voice made them feel. And I let them. Because somewhere between the echo and the silence, I stopped knowing the difference. One night, after a performance in Madrid, Lucien handed me a contract, a global deal with a London-based label. "Your life," he said, "is about to begin." I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I felt something shift in my chest. A quiet, wordless ache, like a prayer interrupted. I signed it anyway. That same night, I called home. My mother answered. Her voice trembled like it was afraid to cross the distance. She said my father was sick, that he refused treatment, that he still played my old cassette reciting verses between my songs, as if trying to bless the sound that betrayed him. I promised to visit. I didn't. The tour schedule was too tight, I said. But the truth was uglier. I couldn't face the silence I had abandoned. By the time I performed at the Royal Albert Hall, I was no longer Salma from Essaouira. I was Selma Noor, draped in gold and sequins, singing words written by strangers about desires I didn't feel. When the lights hit my face, the crowd saw freedom. I saw exile. Lucien once told me, "There's no greater loneliness than success you prayed against." I didn't understand him then, but backstage, after every standing ovation, I felt an emptiness that applause couldn't fill, like being loved in a language you can't translate. Then came the moment I can't forget. After a concert in Milan, a journalist asked, "Do you still believe in God?" I froze. The cameras clicked, the room waited. I smiled, that rehearsed, photogenic smile, and said, "I believe in music." That quote made headlines the next day. It sold records. But it also reached Essaouira. My brother called 2 weeks later. He didn't say hello, he just said, "He stopped listening to your voice." Then silence. Not the kind that hurts, the kind that ends things. In the months that followed, my songs grew louder, as if I could drown guilt with volume. I began adding electronic beats, removing Arabic verses, erasing the soul note by note. Each performance was an act of forgetting, each applause an erasure. But the more I sang, the quieter I became inside. Some nights after a show, I'd come home, wash off my makeup, and find the Quran still tucked in my suitcase, unopened, untouched. I couldn't throw it away. I couldn't open it either. It became like a mirror I avoided, a reflection I no longer deserved. Fame, I learned, doesn't corrupt you instantly. It seduces you by degrees. It whispers, "You're free," while quietly taking away every part of you that once meant something. By the end of the second album, I was adored, but I didn't adore anything back. I had no faith, no family, no home, only a name printed on tickets and a voice that no longer sounded like mine. Sometimes, before a show, I'd close my eyes and imagine my father's voice, steady, rhythmic, unshaken, and I'd feel the weight of his absence pressing against every note. That was the real temptation. Not fame itself, but the illusion that it could replace belonging. There comes a moment in every singer's life when applause turns into oxygen. You don't breathe unless they love you, and if they stop, you die. For me, that moment arrived in Berlin, a city that never slept, never confessed, never forgave. It was the first night of my European tour, and the air outside the club smelled of rain and cigarettes, that beautiful mix of danger and artifice I had grown addicted to. Inside, the lights pulsed like heartbeats. Crowds moved like waves, faceless, nameless, hungry. When I stepped on stage, sequins catching every flash, I wasn't Salma Idrissi from Morocco anymore. I wasn't even Selma Noor. I was a silhouette made of sound, a vessel for other people's escape. They wanted to forget themselves, and I, foolishly, wanted to be unforgettable. The night began with energy, but ended with something heavier. Lucien, my producer, whispered between sets, "They adore you. You've become desire itself." His words weren't praise, they were prophecy. That's what I became, a fantasy in high heels. After the show, I followed him to a private bar, the kind where mirrors outnumber windows. He ordered champagne, and the first sip tasted like victory and surrender combined. He said, "Art dies in purity. You must live dirty to sing clean." I laughed, because part of me already believed it. I let him touch my hand. It was the beginning of a performance with no audience. In the following months, I fell deeper, not in love, but in permission. Permission to forget. Permission to indulge. Permission to turn every boundary into melody. Paris nights blurred into London mornings. Backstage became bedrooms. Contracts became promises. And my body became currency, traded for relevance, affection, or simply to feel human for a few hours. People often ask artists about creative freedom. They never ask about moral erosion. Freedom, for me, became a slow kind of hunger. The more I fed it, the emptier I grew. There was one night in Amsterdam when the crowd screamed so loud I couldn't hear my own voice. For a moment, I thought, maybe this is heaven, a place where no one prays, only feels. After the show, I stood alone in the dressing room, still trembling with adrenaline. I looked into the mirror and saw lipstick smeared like blood. The woman staring back at me had everything I once prayed for, and eyes that looked like they'd forgotten the prayer. I whispered, "Is this what you wanted, Baba?" But mirrors don't answer. They just reflect the lie you feed them. Drugs came next, not the hard ones, just the polite ones. Little white pills that promised energy, focus, lightness. Lucien said they kept the vocal cords sharp. He lied. They kept my conscience quiet. Each pill took me one step further from Essaouira, from the sound of the sea, from the rhythm of my father's recitations. I began to sing differently, louder, more desperate, as if I could shout the guilt out of my chest. The fans called it raw emotion. I called it survival. Once, during a concert in Lisbon, the power went out mid-song. The crowd fell silent. In that darkness, I heard my own breathing. For a terrifying moment, I thought the silence would kill me. So I started to sing, without a microphone, without lights. My voice echoed through the hall like a ghost remembering its body. When the lights returned, the audience erupted in applause. They called it authentic. But I knew what it was, a glimpse of who I used to be, a woman singing for something higher than herself. I should have listened to that silence. Instead, I drowned it again. Lucien and I became inseparable, on stage, off stage, in headlines. He told people we were creative partners. Behind closed doors, he became something else, a man who loved my sound but not my soul. He once said, "The audience doesn't want truth, Selma. They want tragedy dressed in beauty." I became both. The first real fight came after a photo shoot. They dressed me in a sheer golden robe, my head uncovered, my body posed against a backdrop of desert dunes. When the image hit magazines, the caption read, "From veil to velvet, the desert sinner." I stared at that headline for hours. The word sinner felt heavier than fame itself. I almost called home, but then I saw the comments flooding in. Millions of hearts, fire emojis, adoration. And just like that, I forgave the insult. That was the day I realized I didn't need faith anymore. I had followers. The tour extended to New York. For the first time, I stood before an audience that didn't understand my language, yet they still screamed when I sang. I thought that was power. But power is a lonely thing. Every night ended with someone's arm around me, and every morning began with a hotel room that smelled of perfume and regret. I started avoiding my reflection, not because I hated it, but because I feared I'd start to love the stranger staring back. Lucien noticed the exhaustion. He said, "You're not depressed, Selma. You're evolving." Evolution, it turns out, is just destruction dressed in progress. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in whispers, missed rehearsals, lost notes, moments when my voice cracked and the audience thought it was artistic vulnerability. But I knew it wasn't art. It was decay. In one particularly brutal night in Vienna, I forgot the lyrics mid-song. My mind went blank, my mouth dry. The crowd began to murmur. I froze, and then, without warning, I started reciting a verse from the Quran. Not out of faith, out of desperation. The words came like muscle memory. The melody wrapped around them like light around smoke. For 30 seconds, the world stood still. Then the applause returned, confused, euphoric, loud. They thought it was part of the act. I bowed, but inside, I felt something break. Quietly, irreversibly. That night, in my hotel room, Lucien stormed in, furious. "What the hell was that?" he yelled. "You can't bring religion into this." They want rebellion, not repentance. I stared at him, realizing how far I'd gone to be told who I could or couldn't be. He left, and for the first time, I didn't chase him. Instead, I took out my father's cassette, the one I'd carried for years, unopened. I pressed play. The sound was warped, faint, his voice reciting verses I'd long abandoned. I sat on the floor and listened until dawn, until the city lights dimmed and the call to prayer from a nearby mosque slipped through the window. For the first time in years, I cried. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I had become. They say every artist must face the mirror they've been avoiding. Mine came in the form of a phone call 3 days later. My father was dead. The night I heard of my father's death, I was scheduled to perform in Barcelona. Lucien said, "We can't cancel. The hall's sold out. Your father would want you to sing." He didn't understand. He never knew the kind of man who measured love in silence, not applause. I sang that night anyway, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. When the lights came up, I saw the crowd swaying, the usual trance of devotion, but I wasn't there. I was still in Essaouira, a little girl sitting by the courtyard, listening to her father's voice rise and fall like the tide. Halfway through the performance, I forgot the words. The microphone trembled in my hand. A murmur swept through the crowd. Someone clapped, trying to rescue the silence, but the sound felt like mockery. So I stopped. I closed my eyes and said quietly, "I can't sing tonight." Then I walked off stage. That was the last concert of my career. The next morning, I flew home. Essaouira looked smaller, quieter, as if time had folded in on itself. The streets still smelled of salt and mint tea, but the house was filled with the echo of prayers I no longer knew how to join. My father was gone, wrapped in white cloth, his face calm, untouched by disappointment. My mother held my hands but didn't look at me. In her silence, I felt judgment sharper than any word. At the funeral, the imam asked if anyone from the family wished to recite. I wanted to say yes, but my voice betrayed me. When I opened my mouth, no sound came out. Years of smoke, neon, and sin had coated my throat. The voice that once carried verses could only tremble. The imam began reciting instead. I stood beside the grave, feeling each syllable dig into me like sand carried by wind. When the last prayer ended, the crowd dispersed, but I remained, watching the sunlight fall across the soil. For the first time, I felt the true weight of silence. Not absence, but consequence. That night, I stayed in my childhood room. Everything was the same: the wooden window, the cracked mirror, the faint smell of rosewater. But I was no longer the same girl. I took out the cassette again, pressed play, and let his voice fill the room. He was reciting Surah Ar-Rahman. "Then which of your Lord's favors will you deny?" The verse repeated again and again, until it felt less like scripture and more like an accusation. I wanted to scream, to explain that I never meant to abandon faith. I just wanted to be seen. But I realized, too late, that I had confused light for warmth, applause for love, and art for absolution. In the days that followed, I refused interviews, ignored calls. Lucien sent messages. "Think about your career. We can spin this. A tribute album, perhaps." I blocked him. Instead, I wandered the town, wearing plain clothes and no makeup, listening to the sea. It sounded different now. Not like promise, but forgiveness. One afternoon, a girl approached me in the market. She was maybe 15, veiled, eyes bright. She said, "Madame Salma, I learned your song Desert Light for the school performance." I didn't know how to respond. Her innocence hurt. So I smiled and said, "Sing it for yourself, not for them." She nodded, not understanding. How could she? I barely did. The house felt emptier each day. My mother spoke little. When she did, it was practical. Eat, rest, pray. But one night she broke the silence. She asked, "Was it worth it?" Her voice cracked not from anger, but from the exhaustion of love. I wanted to say no, to fall into her arms and beg for forgiveness. But pride, that old ghost, still clung to me. So I said, "I don't know." She looked at me for a long time, then whispered, "Your father prayed that you would find silence again." Those words struck deeper than any curse, because I realized that's what he'd been doing all those years, not rejecting me, but praying I'd remember where my voice began. The label terminated my contract soon after. Unreliable behavior, they said. Lucian moved on to another singer, younger, hungrier. The tabloids wrote headlines about my spiritual breakdown. Fans debated whether I'd gone mad or found God. Neither was true. I was simply empty, a hollow stage where echoes performed without permission. Nights became long, sleepless. I'd lie awake listening to the wind outside, the same wind that once carried my first song across the rooftops. I used to believe that wind made me special. Now I knew it had only ever tried to carry me home. One evening, I walked to the seaside, the call to prayer rising in the distance. I removed my shoes, let the waves wash over my feet. The horizon glowed faintly pink, and for the first time in years, I hummed, softly, without words, without audience. It wasn't a song. It was a confession. I realized then that my father had never asked me to stop singing. He had only asked me to remember why. Music wasn't the sin. Forgetfulness was. Weeks passed. My mother began talking again. She said the neighbors whispered about my return, that some pitied me, others judged. I didn't care. Their opinions sounded like static. All that mattered was the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. The call to prayer, the clinking of dishes, the rustle of wind against curtains. In that stillness, my voice began to heal. Not to perform, but to remember. One night, my mother placed her hand on mine and said, "There's a funeral next week, a neighbor's son. They asked if you would sing a verse." I hesitated, then nodded. Not because I wanted redemption, but because silence had finally taught me how to mean it. At the funeral, I didn't bring a microphone. No instruments, no lights, no costumes. Just breath and memory. When I began to sing, the first note cracked, raw and human. But the second carried warmth. By the third, the courtyard filled with stillness, not applause, but presence. I didn't sing words from my albums. I sang a verse from my father's favorite surah. My mother wept quietly. The air was heavy with peace. That fragile kind of peace that comes after confession. When I finished, no one clapped. No one needed to. It was the first performance that felt true. That night, I wrote a note in my journal. Fame gave me noise. faith gave me silence. Between the two, I finally found my own voice. Confession doesn't always begin with words. Sometimes it begins with breath, the kind that trembles before truth is ready to be said aloud. After the funeral, I stayed behind in the courtyard long after everyone had left. The scent of incense lingered in the air, and the call to prayer rolled through the dusk like the sea returning home. For the first time, I didn't feel judged by it. I felt invited. That night, I sat beside my father's grave, the soil cool beneath my hands. I closed my eyes and whispered the lines I once sang for the world, but now they sounded different, smaller, cleaner, almost fragile. The wind picked them up, carrying them somewhere I couldn't follow. That's when I realized, for years, I had mistaken silence for punishment. But silence is mercy. It doesn't accuse, it waits. In the weeks that followed, I began recording again, not for studios or contracts, but for myself. I borrowed an old tape recorder from a friend and started making what I called letters in sound. Each recording began with a whisper. "Baba, can you hear me?" Then I'd hum verses from my childhood, layered with fragments of prayers, half-forgotten melodies, and the rhythm of my breath. Sometimes the recordings ended abruptly, as if emotion had cut the power. I never planned to share them, but one night, my mother walked in while I was listening. She stood quietly, then said, "This is what he meant when he said your voice belongs to the sky." I began to help at the local music school, teaching children folk songs, helping young girls find confidence in their voices. It was strange at first, being in a place where no one recognized me, where my name meant nothing. But it was freeing, too. Here, every voice mattered, not for how it sounded, but for what it tried to express. One afternoon, a shy student named Amina approached me. She said, "Miss Selma, I want to sing, but my father says music leads to sin." Her words pierced me like an echo of my own past. I told her, "Music doesn't lead anywhere by itself. It's the heart that chooses where it goes." She smiled, uncertain, but later that day, I heard her singing softly in the hallway. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. Months passed, and the world slowly forgot about Selma Noor. The news stopped writing about my disappearance. The internet stopped asking if I'd found religion or lost sanity. I was gone from their memory, and yet, more alive than ever. Then, one morning, a letter arrived from Lucien. It was postmarked from Paris. He wrote, "I listened to your funeral recording online. Someone uploaded it. I didn't recognize your voice at first. It scared me. It was too honest." He ended with a single line. Maybe art was never about sound, but about silence that lingers. I didn't reply. Some ghosts don't need conversation, only understanding. As I walked through the streets of Essaouira, children would sometimes call out, "Sing for us, miss." I'd laugh and shake my head, but occasionally I did. Not the songs from my albums, but the simple ones. Songs about wind, about rain, about mercy. The more I sang, the more I understood. I had never really lost my voice. I had just used it to serve the wrong kind of worship. Faith isn't about silence or sound. It's about direction. And for years, I'd been facing the wrong way. One evening, my mother and I sat by the sea, watching the sky turn amber. She said, "You used to sing to be loved. Now you sing to listen." I asked her what she meant. She smiled. "That's what your father used to say. God doesn't need your songs. He just wants to know if you're still listening." Those words settled in me like peace does after a long storm. For the first time, I felt gratitude, not for success, not for redemption, but for endurance. Later that night, I returned to the small room where I recorded my tapes. I pressed record and whispered, "This is my confession." Then I sang, not with perfection, but with truth. The melody was uneven, the breath heavy, but every note carried weight. Between verses, I said, "I sang to be seen, and I lost sight. I sang for applause, and forgot prayer. But tonight I sing for silence, for the space between guilt and grace." I ended with a single hum, a sound that wasn't quite music, but felt more sacred than anything I'd ever recorded. When I played it back, I noticed something strange. At the end of the tape, after my voice faded, there was another sound. Soft, rhythmic, distant. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I listened closely, I realized it was a faint recording of my father's voice from that old cassette, somehow imprinted over mine. He was reciting again, "Then which of your Lord's favors will you deny?" I smiled through tears. This time, I whispered, "None." The next morning, I walked to the mosque. Not to perform, not to prove anything, just to be there. The familiar scent of sandalwood filled the air. I sat quietly at the back, listening to the imam's recitation. It wasn't about belief or belonging anymore. It was about being still enough to hear. When he finished, I stayed seated, eyes closed, letting the silence between verses wash over me. In that space, I finally understood what my father had been teaching all along. That music and faith were never enemies. Only my pride made them so. On the 40th day after my father's passing, the family gathered in the courtyard. Candles flickered in stubby glass cups. The tea tasted of mint and memory, and the women's whispers moved like water along the tiles. No posters, no schedules, no sound check. Just a circle of faces that had known me before I belonged to strangers. An aunt pressed my hands and said softly, "Arba'in." 40 days of letting love learn its way back through grief. I nodded. The air smelled of cumin and rosewater, and the wind threaded the alleys with that old coastal hum that had started everything. The imam recited. We answered Amen. A neighbor read supplication for the fathers who leave and the daughters who stay. Then my mother looked at me. No command, no plea. Only a question I had fled for years. What will you do with your voice now? I stood. No microphone, no stage, no costume. Only breath and a name. "Baba," I whispered. "I am here." I didn't sing like I used to. I didn't float or sharpen. I didn't prove anything to the air. I let the first note come out hard and human, the way truth does when it has been hiding too long. The courtyard held me steady. The candles trembled like small hearts, and every face I loved stayed still, not an audience, a witness. I sang the verse he taught me when I was a child, the one about mercy arriving again and again, even when we stop deserving it. My voice was not beautiful, it was honest. And in that honesty, there was a beauty I had never reached with gold lights and thunderous crowds. I sang until the last breath of the line found the wall, and returned to me as nothing but quiet. No one clapped. No one moved to fill the silence. It was the only performance that felt true. Afterward, my mother kissed my forehead. "Your father would have said the sky is pleased," she murmured. I didn't know what the sky thinks, but I knew I could finally listen to its wind without hearing my own hunger in it. Days slipped into a gentler rhythm. I woke before dawn, made tea, walked the shoreline while the city yawned awake. Amina from the music school came on Tuesdays. Others followed. We practiced scales with the windows open so the gulls could argue back. Sometimes I told them stories. How a note listens for the word that deserves it. How a song refuses to be sung for the wrong reasons twice. I kept recording tapes, not to release, not to brand, not to heal the world. To keep a ledger with the silence. Letter after letter I sent into the little plastic mouth of that machine. I went too far. I forgot who gave breath to breath. I am learning to return without asking to be applauded for it. When I played them back, the room felt warm, like memory had a temperature. One afternoon, the postman brought a padded envelope from London. Inside was a single vinyl pressed by someone I didn't know, with a note. "We found a clip of your funeral song. We cut the noise, left only the room breathing. It's the most alive thing we've mastered all year." There was a link. I didn't click it. I put the record on a high shelf between recipe pamphlets and a book of dua. Some things shouldn't travel. Some things live where they were made. I met Lucien once more, by accident, years turning our names into rumors. He was older, softer around the eyes. We sat at a cafe, two people who once mistook each other for answers. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for contracts or pills or headlines, but for convincing me that volume equals truth." We parted with no promises. It felt right, like closing a rehearsal room you'll never rent again. On Fridays, I visit the graves. I bring nothing but time. I tell my father the little things. Amina hitting a high note without fear. My mother's roses blooming early. The neighbor boy building a drum from a tin of olives and playing the rain out of it. Sometimes I hum. The ground listens with perfect patience. In that patience, I learn again how to ask for nothing. People still recognize me now and then. They want selfies, a memory to anchor their own longing. I smile. I bless their day with a few simple words. And if they ask me to sing, I tell them what I tell my students. Not here. Here we practice listening. A few look disappointed. Most don't. Most feel the relief of being allowed to stand inside a moment that isn't asking anything from them. There are nights when the old hunger returns. A clip from a past performance surfacing in a feed. A hall roaring, my younger face wearing that dangerous light. I let the ache pass through me like a wave through nets. Some truths are permanent. I loved the worship. I forgot the worshipped. Knowing this doesn't reopen the wound. It guards it. In the music school's end-of-year recital, we bring the chairs outside and string lamps over the courtyard. Parents crowd the gate. Spices drift from windows. The first star dares the lamps to compete. Each child sings a small song about rain or figs or the patience of fishermen. We clap only once per performance, soft and brief, like returning something borrowed. Amina closes the evening with the verse I sang at Arba'in. She is still afraid of her own strength, still braver than she knows. When she finishes, no one claps. The children look to me. I shake my head and smile. Keep it, I whisper. They keep it. The silence is complete. After the families drift home, I stay to coil cables that never carried my sound. The lamps click off one by one. In the half-dark, the courtyard sounds like the inside of a seashell. Wind, distant feet, the earth's slow breath. I think of the cities that once swallowed my name and returned only hunger. I think of my father, counting beads he didn't live to finish. I think of the way a voice can be a door in either direction. On the walk home, I rehearse the smallest litany. I have enough. I am forgiven on days I don't yet deserve it. My voice is for meaning, not proof. At my doorway, I turn to the night. I want to leave something for it, the way it always left room for me. So I sing. One line, no more. Low and plain. The pitch you use when telling a secret to someone who already loves you. No microphone. No applause. Only a note returning to the sky it came from, and the quiet after, which feels like home. I used to believe redemption was a stage I could earn back. Now I know it is a room with the door open, waiting, patient as the sea. I step inside each morning, set a kettle on, and let the day teach me the rest. When the wind slips through the shutters, it carries the same old song. This time, I hum along, not to be heard, but to belong.